Saraphina Kingsley was more than just a troubled kid. She was a natural disaster in a designer school uniform. 15 years old, impossibly wealthy, and famous in the circles of high-paid child specialists for her near-perfect record of career destruction. Her father, Edgar Kingsley, controlled a sprawling tech empire that dictated the lives of millions. Yet, he was utterly helpless against the one soul who truly mattered, his own daughter. He could buy any solution in the world, but none could buy him a moment's peace. The evidence of his failure was scattered across his gilded life. A succession of crying tutors, 3 high-profile expulsions, and an estimated $500,000 in damage from a single chaotic weekend. No one could handle the billionaire's daughter. They had all tried money, discipline, and fear. The stage was set for the next casualty. It was a perfectly crisp afternoon in the exclusive dining room of the Regent, and the latest professional was about to meet his fate. Only the next person to approach Saraphina's table wasn't a doctor or a tutor. She was a waitress named Clara, studying for her psychology exams, and she was about to do the impossible. Hi, my beautiful and lovely family. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be sharing another story just as wild, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now, let's begin. The water still shimmered on the white linen of the dining table at the Regent, an expensive, crystalline stain that perfectly encapsulated the wreckage Saraphina Kingsley habitually left in her wake. For Edgar Kingsley, the sight was a familiar defeat. For the waitress, Clara, it was just another mess to clean up. As the day's high drama faded into the quiet efficiency of closing shift, Clara ran a damp cloth over the mahogany bar of the cafe section she managed. Her own shift ended an hour after the last elite diners had departed, and fatigue was a dull ache behind her eyes. Yet, the memory of Saraphina, the defiant blue blazer, and the sudden fierce splash was more troubling than the exhaustion. Most people saw a privileged brat acting out. Clara, however, had watched the girl's eyes just before the glass tipped. They were not the eyes of cruelty, but of desperate control. Clara finally unlocked the door to her tiny studio apartment, a space defined by necessity. Textbooks, abnormal psychology, theories of counseling were stacked like unstable towers around her worn sofa. The air conditioning hummed too loudly, a constant, irritating reminder of the city's indifferent sprawl. She changed quickly, the familiar scent of recycled restaurant linens giving way to the faint metallic scent of ink from her notes. She logged into her online psychology portal, the glowing screen illuminating her face as she skimmed the material she could barely afford. Her drive to understand the broken human mind was rooted in her own past. Her mother, gentle and impossibly wise, had died in a sudden car accident years ago. The acute, tearing grief that had followed had nearly swallowed Clara whole. But instead of turning outward in destruction, she had turned inward, converting her pain into a quiet, almost intuitive ability to read the subtle signals beneath other surfaces. She watched people, not just their movements, but the minute shifts in their posture and the flicker of their eyes, the tales that revealed the emotional architecture beneath a social facade. She saw the rage in Saraphina, but her instinct whispered that it was merely a defensive rampart built around a profound and hidden sorrow. The meeting. A sharp knock at her door startled her out of her concentration. Clara opened it cautiously and immediately felt the oppressive weight of wealth and power on her doorstep. Edgar Kingsley stood there, impeccably dressed, but the perfection of his suit was betrayed by the raw anxiety in his face. Behind him, parked at the curb like a silent, black predator, was his armored Mercedes and driver. "Miss Hayes," Edgar said, his voice low and formal. "I apologize for the late intrusion. I need to speak with you privately, now." Clara didn't hesitate. She led him not into her cluttered apartment, but across the hall and back into the empty, darkened cafe, flipping a single light switch over the bar. The space felt eerily vast without the noise and motion of the day. Edgar leaned against the counter, his posture suddenly slumping, shedding the corporate titan for the desperate father. "I saw what you did at lunch, Miss Hayes, or rather what you didn't do. I poured the water back into the glass, and I didn't flinch." "No, you didn't," You looked her in the eye. Everyone else runs or explodes. You were calm, he confessed, his voice heavy with 2 years of failure. I've tried everything, Miss Hayes, psychologists, behavioral specialists, military-style boarding schools, wilderness therapy, medication. I've spent millions. Nothing works. She only gets worse. I'm losing my daughter, and I don't understand what changed her. He pushed a heavy manila envelope across the polished wood. I want you to be her companion, her mentor, full-time. Clara frowned, not touching the envelope. I'm a waitress, Mr. Kingsley, not a child expert. Precisely. You're not a specialist she can break. You're someone who didn't fear her. Look at the terms. Clara opened the envelope. The numbers made her gasp silently. The compensation was stunning. $300,000 annually, full benefits, and most incredibly, paid tuition for her graduate degree in psychology. The conditions were equally unbelievable. She would reside in the private guest house on the estate, have complete authority over her approach to Saraphina, and Edgar promised absolutely no parental interference. It was a 1-year contract, renewable. Edgar watched her, his expression weary. I know what it looks like. I'm trying to buy a solution. Maybe I am, but you're my last option, Miss Hayes, before I lose her completely to whatever darkness she's battling. Decision. The money was life-altering. It represented security, freedom, and the immediate completion of her dreams. But Clara's eyes were fixed on Edgar, not the contract. She sensed a deeper transaction was taking place, not the exchange of money for control, but a desperate plea for a connection. I need to ask you something, Mr. Kingsley, Clara said, pushing the contract slightly away. When did it start? When did she become, in your words, impossible?
Edgar looked away, staring into the dark street outside, the silence stretching taut between them. 2 years ago, after her mother died. The simple answer resonated like a struck bell in Clara's chest. Grief, not malice, but pain, not cruelty, but the flailing of a child drowning in an adult emotion. Clara saw her younger self reflected in Saraphina's violent resistance. She picked up the envelope and tucked it under her arm. I'll take the job, Clara said, her voice firm, accepting the challenge not for the security, but for the soul behind the spectacle. But you need to understand, I'm not here to fix her. I'm here to listen to her. Edgar stared at her, still not entirely understanding the distinction, but the desperation in his heart forced the agreement. Do what you must. Clara nodded, returning to her studio to pack the few sparse belongings that defined her independent life. She was shedding her skin as a student waitress, preparing to enter a golden cage, a world of billion-dollar problems and fragile, broken hearts, where the only currency that mattered was empathy. She knew she was not just packing for a new job, but for a war against deep, unacknowledged sorrow. Clara's departure from her small life was swift. She packed her 3 boxes of books and clothes, finalized her student apartment lease, and by 9 a.m. the next morning, she was being driven through the gates of the Kingsley estate. The transition was less a career change and more an entrance into a different dimension. The Kingsley compound stretched over 30 manicured acres, a private kingdom carved out of the city's greenest hills. The main house itself was a behemoth of architectural precision, glass, steel, and pale stone, less a home and more a modern palace dedicated to displaying the silent power of old money. It felt cold, beautiful, and utterly impenetrable. The vehicle bypassed the main drive, pulling up instead to the guest house. If Clara's former studio apartment was defined by necessity, the guest house was defined by excess. It was a spacious 2-story structure with a private garden, a separate entrance, and interiors that were more luxurious than any hotel she had ever seen. It promised complete privacy, which she understood immediately was a condition of her survival. The courtiers. Her orientation felt less like a job onboarding and more like navigating a wary royal court. Mrs. Chen, the long-serving housekeeper, gave Clara a tour with a face carved from granite. Her gaze was sharp, her warnings subtle. "Miss Saraphina has routines," she stated, emphasizing the word with a pointed look that said, "Do not disrupt them, or you will pay." Marcus, the head of security, was a quiet, formidable man who monitored the estate through screens. He was protective to the point of being hostile. He handed her a swipe card and simply said, "My job is to maintain the perimeter. Hers is inside. Don't cross the line." The implication was clear. The line was Saraphina, and stepping on the wrong side meant immediate termination, or worse, collateral damage. Antoine, the personal chef, a man whose creativity was only matched by his dismissal of Clara, sniffed at her presence. "Another one? They come like the seasons, miss. They never last the harvest." Clara absorbed the collective wariness. They weren't being malicious, they were protecting themselves. They had all witnessed the repeated, brutal truth. Saraphina Kingsley destroys people. The shrine and the silence. The tour of the main house was unnerving. Every room was sterile elegance, polished and arranged with the precision of a museum exhibit. But the atmosphere was not of wealth, it was one of frozen grief. Photos of the late wife, Elise Kingsley, were everywhere. She was beautiful, warm, and seemed to possess a light that defied the gloom of the massive house. In every picture she was smiling, alive, vital, and radiating an effortless grace. The sterile elegance was broken only by one space Mrs. Chen pointedly avoided, an entire wing sealed off with heavy, closed oak doors. Mrs. Chen murmured, lowering her voice, "Saraphina's mother's rooms. Mr. Kingsley's orders, no one goes there. It has been untouched for 2 years." Clara filed the information away. An official shrine, a physical demarcation of where the world fractured. What Clara noticed wasn't the presence of Elise, but the absence of anything else. There were no recent candid family photos, no evidence of everyday life from the last 2 years, no current moments, just the preserved past and the empty, controlled present. It was a house defined by a sudden stop, a vacuum where joy used to be. It was 10 minutes before the scheduled tutoring session when Clara decided to make her move. She found Saraphina in a sun-drenched breakfast room overlooking the manicured lawns, ignoring a perfectly arranged plate of smoked salmon and capers. Saraphina was wearing tailored loungewear and had the bored, distant look of someone waiting for a clock to run out. Clara entered without knocking or waiting for an invitation, which was the first breach of household protocol. She pulled out a chair and sat across the vast marble table from Saraphina, simply existing in the space. Saraphina didn't look up immediately, instead running her finger along the edge of her porcelain plate. "So," she said, her voice laced with the heavy syrup of teenage sarcasm, "he hired the waitress? How desperate is he?" Clara picked up a pastry from the untouched platter and took a deliberate bite. "Pretty desperate," she replied, chewing slowly, "and I took a significant pay cut on the tips, so yes, I'm expensive." The casual honesty caught Saraphina completely off guard. The girl's head snapped up, her expression shifting from practiced disdain to genuine surprise. Clara didn't try to befriend her, didn't offer a lecture on attitude, and didn't mention the shattered water glass. She just sat there, calmly consuming a croissant. This was not the expected reaction of fear, pity, or aggressive control. "I'm not going to tutoring," Saraphina announced, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Okay," Clara said, brushing a flake of pastry from her clean blouse. "What are you doing instead?" Saraphina stared, baffled. This was the confusion Clara wanted to elicit. The absence of argument, the lack of immediate consequences, the refusal to engage in a power struggle.
"What are you, a therapist? I'm supposed to tell you my feelings?" Saraphina sneered, leaning back. "I'm not a therapist yet," Clara corrected easily. "I'm just the woman who's getting $300,000 to be in the same room with you for the next year. It's better if we're both comfortable." Saraphina tried to provoke her, testing the limit. She mentioned breaking a priceless ceramic vase last week, detailing the sound it made when it hit the floor, and recounted a fictional, elaborate story about torturing her previous companion with non-stop noise. Clara simply listened, her face placid. She pulled a small, worn notebook and a pen from her pocket and wrote something down in precise, small script. "What are you writing?" Saraphina demanded, leaning forward, curiosity overriding malice. Clara closed the book, placing the pen on top. "Things you think will make me leave. I'm making a checklist. It helps me prepare." Saraphina's face flushed with a mixture of anger and frustration at the failure of her theatrics. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "Then leave now! I demand you leave me alone!" Clara remained seated. "I can give you space. I can stay in the guest house. I can wait in the garden. But I'm not leaving the estate, Saraphina. Those are two very different things." This was the first boundary Clara drew. Respect for Saraphina's need for autonomy, but absolute refusal to abandon her. It established a pattern. She would not force intimacy, but she would also not be driven away. Saraphina stared for a long, volatile moment, searching Clara's eyes for the inevitable flicker of fear or surrender. Finding none, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the breakfast room. But just before she disappeared, she paused at the doorway, the threshold between her controlled world and the chaos she created, and glanced back. It was a fleeting, confused look, like a creature seeing a trap that didn't snap shut. Clara remained alone in the sterile elegance, finishing her pastry. The silence was deafening, broken only by the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. She knew the real work of listening, of peeling back the layers of guilt and grief, had not even begun. The first weeks at the Kingsley estate were less a period of adjustment, more a period of attrition. Clara had walked into a silent war zone, and Saraphina Kingsley was determined to prove that her new companion was just as fragile as all the others. Saraphina's tactics were elaborate, tailored to provoke the precise moment of failure. The girl employed a detailed montage of psychological warfare. There was the silent treatment, where Clara would exist in the same room for hours without acknowledgement. There were the elaborate pranks. Clara's textbooks rearranged into unsettling towers in the guest house, her coffee spiked with enough salt to require an emergency bathroom trip, and the continuous attempts at public humiliation, such as loudly declaring Clara a charity case hired to manage the trash. Clara's response, however, was stubbornly consistent: a calm presence, zero emotional reaction, and patient, unyielding observation. She treated every provocation like a laboratory experiment that yielded predictable, boring results. When salt ruined her coffee, she simply poured another cup. When Saraphina ignored her, Clara read her psychology texts. The key was refusing to engage the behavior while always remaining nearby, respecting the space without ever signaling abandonment. Slowly, the staff began to notice. Mrs. Chen's gaze grew less judgmental and more curious. Marcus, the security chief, actually gave a small nod one afternoon. The common thread of their speculation was the same. Clara wasn't breaking. In fact, Saraphina seemed almost frustrated by this new companion's frustrating lack of fragility. Edgar Kingsley, watching from the distance of his office and his black and white security feeds, remained uncertain. He saw no progress, no sudden reconciliation, but he also saw no tears, no resignation, and no requests for severance. For a man accustomed to rapid, definitive results, Clara's quiet persistence was an enigma. Clara understood that the rage was the smoke, the grief was the fire. Her primary goal was to find the fissures in Saraphina's defensive wall. She tracked the girl's chaotic schedule with the precision of a research scientist. One pattern emerged with remarkable clarity. Saraphina disappeared at the same time every evening,
always between 7 and 8 p.m. The route was consistent, leading towards the sterile, silent West Wing, the sealed-off quarter where her mother's rooms lay. She always returned quiet, sometimes visibly red-eyed, her aggression momentarily drained. Clara never followed. She only noted the pattern and the emotional toll. She also noticed a physical anchor, the simple silver bracelet Saraphina wore daily. It bore a single, tiny music note charm. It was never removed, never fiddled with, a secret talisman in a house where everything else was disposable. The breakthrough came one afternoon during a sudden, violent thunderstorm that rolled across the valley. The sky turned an alarming shade of bruised purple, and fat, heavy rain hammered against the glass walls of the house. Clara found Saraphina seated on the covered veranda overlooking the downpour, completely unguarded. Her expression was distant, soft, and tinged with profound sadness. This was a moment of weakness, a crack in the armor, and Clara knew the approach had to be precise. She didn't announce her presence. She simply moved the railing 10 feet away, watching the downpour with equal silence. After a full minute of only the rain's roar, Saraphina spoke, her voice startlingly low, without the usual sarcasm. She loved thunderstorms. She'd play piano during them. It was the first voluntary mention of her mother. Clara didn't press, didn't offer sympathy, and didn't look at Saraphina. She focused on the rhythm of the rain. "What did she play?" asked Clara, matching the low, conversational tone. "Chopin, nocturnes mostly. Said rain was nature's accompaniment. All the minor keys made the storm sound beautiful instead of scary." The silence that settled between them now was different. It wasn't hostile or weaponized. It was shared, a fragile bridge built out of memory. Saraphina turned her head suddenly. "Why'd you take this job? Really? You could have said no."
This was the opening. Clara didn't recite the company line or the psychological rationale. She offered the truth. "My mom died when I was 14. A car accident. I got angry too." Saraphina's defenses cracked slightly, curiosity overtaking hostility. "Did you break things?" "I broke myself for a while. Different kind of destruction. I just stopped feeling anything." A real conversation. Two wounded girls exchanging notes across a massive class and experience barrier. Saraphina reached into the deep pocket of her sweatpants and pulled out a small, tarnished silver object, the source of the music note charm. She wound the miniature key, and a thin, slightly tinny melody began to play, struggling to be heard over the receding storm. "This was hers," Saraphina whispered, looking down at the box. "She kept it in her dressing table. It's the only thing they let me keep from her room. They sealed it off, like she was never there." As the last streaks of sun began to break through the clearing clouds, casting a dramatic gold light across the wet stone, Saraphina asked the question that had been buried beneath 2 years of rage. "Did you stop being angry?" Clara looked directly at the girl, her expression gentle but firm. "I learned my anger wasn't the enemy. What caused it was." Saraphina's brow furrowed as she processed the subtle distinction. "Everyone tells me to stop being angry. My dad, the doctors, the staff, they all just tell me to stop. No one asks why I am." Clara kept her focus steady. "I'm asking you." Saraphina didn't answer. Not yet. She couldn't. But she looked at Clara not as an employee, not as an opponent, but as a window into a shared past. The foundation of trust was fragile, built on the memory of rain and piano music, but it was finally real. If you're captivated by the emotional wreckage caused by grief and the impossible barriers money can build, smash the like button and leave a comment. Tell me, what is Saraphina's most destructive move yet, and how do you think Clara should react when it happens?
The fragile trust established during the thunderstorm was tested immediately. For the next few days, Saraphina was moody and unpredictable, alternating between icy silence and bursts of frustration when Clara refused to engage in a confrontation. Clara, however, maintained her patience, knowing that the real work was not in managing the rage, but in understanding the pattern. The pattern held. Just as the evening light softened and the dinner hour approached, the subtle shift would occur. Saraphina would become restless, her eyes distant, before she executed her quiet, daily vanishing act. On the 5th day after their conversation, Clara decided to follow. She waited until 7:05 p.m., giving Saraphina sufficient time to believe she had achieved her usual solitude. Clara moved through the house with the practiced silence of someone who had spent years observing without being seen. The route was identical to the one she had charted secretly. Down a rarely used corridor, past the sterile drawing rooms, and toward the ominous closed-off west wing. Clara approached the heavy oak doors of the mother's apartment, and just before she reached them, she saw it. A side door to the wing, discreetly propped open by a thick, antique book. Saraphina had, perhaps unconsciously, left a tiny, deliberate opening. Clara waited 10 minutes, listening to the vast, hollow silence of the house. Then she approached the side door and eased inside. The moment she stepped across the threshold, she was enveloped by a different world. It was quiet, save for the sound of beautiful music drifting from deeper within the wing. It was a piano piece, played with a skilled, emotional intensity that contradicted everything Clara knew about the chaotic, destructive teenager. The melody was familiar now, a melancholic Chopin nocturne, the same piece Saraphina had mentioned her mother loved to play during storms. Clara followed the sound to a slightly ajar door. She pushed it open carefully, revealing a converted music room. In the center sat a magnificent grand piano, its dark, polished wood reflecting the fading twilight pouring in from the massive bay windows. Saraphina sat at the bench, her back to the door, utterly lost in the music. The room was dark, lit only by the last vestiges of daylight, giving the scene an intimate, sacred glow. The sacred space. Clara took a moment to absorb the room, which was clearly preserved, the true core of the sealed-off west wing. The walls were lined with framed photographs of Elise Kingsley, many of them showing her seated at this very piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. Sheet music was scattered across a stand, covered in her elegant handwritten notes and annotations. Elise's presence was everywhere, warm and palpable, in contrast to the sterile perfection of the rest of the house. Saraphina finished the piece, the last notes hanging exquisitely in the air before dissolving into silence. She sat motionless, her shoulders trembling slightly. "You taught her." Clara spoke softly into the silence. Saraphina spun around as if struck, her body rigid with a mixture of raw fury and fear. Her eyes were wide, and the peaceful musician was instantly replaced by the wounded, volatile creature of chaos. "Get out," she hissed, springing to her feet. "No one comes here. This is none of your business." Saraphina's rage erupted, a pure, terrifying outburst. She grabbed the antique book that had propped the door open and hurled it against the wall. This was a violation, a betrayal of the fragile space she held sacred, and therefore unforgivable. Clara did not retreat. She stood firm, absorbing the fury without flinching, and spoke directly to the heart of the secret. "This is where you come to find her. This is the only place in this whole massive house where you let yourself breathe." It was a direct hit. Saraphina's anger seemed to short-circuit, the energy shifting instantly into desperation. She took a step back, her hands clenched. "You don't understand anything. You think a few notes on a piano explains it all? You're wrong." "Then explain it to me," Clava challenged, her voice low and steady. "Tell me why you're so angry that this is the only place you can exist without destroying something." The confrontation worked. Saraphina's defenses finally broke, partially. She sank onto the piano bench, covering her face with shaking hands. "She was everything," she choked out. "She understood me. She was the only person who made everything in this cold house make sense." Her voice cracked. "And then she was just gone. One morning she went riding, and by afternoon—" She trailed off, unable to complete the horrific sentence. Clara saw the deeper pain flash behind the tears, the sudden, brutal shock of loss. But she also saw the hesitation, the sudden, fierce reluctance to continue. "But there's something else, Saraphina," Clara pressed gently. "Something about the after that you're not saying. Something that happened after she was gone that makes you feel this guilt." Saraphina shut down immediately. The emotional wall slammed back into place, harder and colder than before. She wiped her eyes fiercely and stood up, pushing past Clara toward the door. "This was a mistake. You need to leave. Now. I don't want to see you." Clara left the music room, respecting the command for space, but refusing the implied demand for flight. As she stepped back into the sterile corridor, she spoke quietly over her shoulder. "I'll keep your secret about this room. It's safe with me. But eventually, you'll need to tell someone the whole truth, not just that she left, but why you think it's your fault." Saraphina didn't respond, but Clara felt the weight of the girl's lingering gaze. She was alone again, in her sacred, darkened space,
but Clara's presence had fundamentally shifted the nature of that solitude. Clara left the West Wing certain that Edgar Kingsley was wrong. Saraphina's trauma was not merely the death of her mother, but a specific, devastating secret tied to it, a secret Clara was now determined to uncover. The fragile truce Clara had established with Saraphina was immediately threatened by the arrival of the one person who seemed to thrive on the Kingsley family's dysfunction, Edgar's sister, Victoria. Victoria arrived for her monthly visit in a sleek black sedan that managed to look even more imposing than Edgar's own. She was elegant, polished, and performed her grief with the precision of a seasoned actress. As she glided into the main foyer, she paused for a melodramatic sigh. "Still miss my dear Elise terribly, Edgar. The house just hasn't been the same." She was instantly, intensely interested in Clara. "And who is this?" Victoria asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Edgar, visibly uncomfortable, explained the new arrangement, minimizing Clara's role as a companion focused on stability. Victoria's polished facade cracked just enough to reveal a sliver of icy disapproval. "Another one. Oh, poor Saraphina. So many strangers passing through her life. I do worry about the lack of consistency." Clara watched her, cataloging the subtle undermining, the quick placement of herself as the only true family voice of concern. Victoria didn't waste time. She sought out Saraphina privately in the sprawling living room, her movements observed by Clara from the discreet distance of the nearby library doorway. The affection Victoria lavished on her niece was saccharine, sickly sweet, and completely false. "My poor darling niece," Victoria cooed, stroking her hair. "Still struggling so much, aren't you? It must be so difficult for your poor father." Saraphina's reaction was not her usual aggressive defiance. It was tension, a palpable, suppressed fear. She stood stiffly beneath her aunt's touch, like a wild animal cornered. Then came the poisoned compliment. Victoria held Saraphina at arm's length, tilting her head. "You look so much like Elise, especially now that you're nearly a woman. It must pain your father to see you every day looking so much like the past he can't hold on to." It was a devastating piece of passive-aggressive commentary, delivered with the voice of pure sweetness. It didn't lift Saraphina up. It immediately saddled her with the burden of her mother's ghost and her father's sorrow. Later that afternoon, Victoria executed the obligatory private moment. She pulled Clara aside in the gallery, her smile fixed. The warning was disguised as concern. "Saraphina is deeply troubled. Damaged, really. Don't expect miracles," Victoria murmured, her voice confidential. She then moved to subtly undermine Clara's legitimacy. "Of course, you're not professionally trained. It's a brave attempt, but I wouldn't invest too much hope." Clara's instincts, honed by years of studying human dysfunction, activated immediately. This woman wasn't concerned with Saraphina. She enjoyed discussing Saraphina's pain. There was something deeply wrong beneath the polished, concerned exterior, a sense of morbid satisfaction every time the family's turmoil was acknowledged. That evening, the pieces of Victoria's agenda began to click into place. Clara was passing Edgar's study, ostensibly retrieving a book, when she heard Victoria's voice pierce the heavy oak door. The tone was sharp and calculating. "She's only getting worse, Edgar. You can't deny it. Perhaps institutional care, a discreet facility out of the country, is the only way to protect her and yourself." Edgar's voice, though weary, held a rare firmness. "She's my daughter, Victoria, not a problem to warehouse." "She's dangerous," Victoria pressed, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial menace. "To herself, to you. The lawyers are concerned about your judgment in this matter. They worry about the liability of her outbursts and the state of her mental health." The implication was clear. Edgar's ability to parent and manage his business was being questioned. Victoria wasn't just observing the chaos. She was actively trying to leverage Saraphina's instability to challenge Edgar's control, perhaps even his guardianship. Clara now understood. Victoria had a larger financial agenda that depended entirely on Saraphina remaining damaged. Driven by this new, disturbing knowledge, Clara sought out Saraphina. She found the girl in her room, the door uncharacteristically ajar. Saraphina looked shaken, curled up on a window seat, staring out at the darkening estate. "She was here earlier," she whispered, her voice frail. "My aunt." "What did she say to you, Saraphina?" Clara asked, sitting on the edge of the window seat. "The same things she always says. That I'm too much, that I'm killing my father slowly with stress, that I destroyed my mother." The last phrase was delivered in a barely audible breath. Clara kept her voice level, but the rage in her heart was ice-cold and controlled. That last part. "Did Victoria tell you that you destroyed your mother?" The truth, the secret that had fueled 2 years of emotional destruction, finally began to spill out. Saraphina's confession was a torrent of pent-up poison. "She was the first person who visited me after the accident. I was only 13. Her eyes were fixed on a distant point. "She told me Mom went riding that morning to clear her head because we had fought that morning. She said Mom was distracted because of me, that if I'd been easier, if I hadn't been so much trouble, Mom would have seen the fence break. She said I caused it." The planted seed was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Victoria had engineered Saraphina's guilt, turning sorrow into self-hatred, and thus into self-destruction. Chapter close. Clara leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a certainty that transcended mere employment. "That woman is lying to you, Saraphina, every word of it, and I'm going to prove it." Saraphina, tears streaming down her face, looked completely undone. Why would anyone say that?
"I don't know yet," Clara admitted, her voice hardening with resolve. "But people who truly care about you don't use your pain to make you feel worthless." The pieces clicked into place with chilling finality. Victoria benefited from Saraphina's destruction and Edgar's subsequent loss of control. The niece was not the problem. She was the pawn. Clara watched from the window as the black sedan carrying Victoria Kingsley pulled silently away from the estate. She knew she had found the real enemy, and unlike Saraphina, this one was fully aware of the destruction she wielded. Victoria is the real enemy, using guilt to destroy a child for power. If you hate manipulative villains who exploit family trauma, smash the like button and leave a comment. Tell me, what is the first piece of evidence Clara needs to find to prove Victoria is lying about the mother's death? Following the emotional breach in the music room, the nature of Clara's employment shifted entirely. The silent war was over, replaced by a careful, blossoming alliance. The subsequent days saw a deepening of the relationship that was neither teacher-student nor companion-charge, but something closer to co-conspirators. Saraphina was slowly opening up, allowing memories of her mother and happier, pre-tragedy times to surface. The music room, once her fortress of solitude, became their meeting place. Saraphina would play, sometimes Chopin, sometimes her own hesitant compositions, and Clara would simply listen, a silent testament to the acceptance of her pain. The research began quietly. Clara, using the internet in her guest house, started piecing together the official reports of Elise's death, discreetly looking for inconsistencies in the estate's public finances, and trying to trace Victoria's financial and social influence. She knew the woman was the key to Saraphina's emotional prison. Edgar, watching from a distance, saw the change in his daughter and was startled by it. She was laughing occasionally, engaging with the world, and, most importantly, she was present. He began to hope for the first time in years, a fragile emotion built entirely on the presence of the waitress he had hired on a whim. This nascent stability did not go unnoticed by the estate's real parasite. As Victoria's scheduled monthly visit approached, her phone calls to Edgar increased sharply. The tone was no longer subtly patronizing, but actively suspicious. "I'm worried about this, Clara," Victoria would tell him, her voice dripping with fake concern. "She seems to have gained Saraphina's trust too quickly. It feels manipulative. She's isolating your daughter, Edgar." Victoria planted doubt like an invisible, insidious weed. "Just be watchful, brother. Remember, she has only one motive: money. Saraphina is a very valuable asset." Edgar defended Clara, citing the genuine improvement, but the poison had been delivered. The trap was sprung on the morning of Victoria's arrival. Edgar was frantic, his control completely gone. He burst into the breakfast room, his face pale and contorted with panic. Elise's diamond bracelet was missing. It was a priceless heirloom passed down from Edgar's grandmother, a family piece of immense emotional and monetary value. It had been kept in the study safe, a relic of protection that only family members knew the combination to. Worse, when Marcus checked the study's security footage, it was mysteriously corrupted, a precise 12-hour gap in the recording, covering the exact time the theft must have occurred. The massive estate was immediately thrown into an uproar, the staff questioned, and the fragile peace shattered. The situation escalated quickly and brutally.
That afternoon, head security Marcus, looking deeply conflicted, approached Clara in the guest house. He held a small, crumpled piece of paper. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes," he murmured, his eyes avoiding hers. "I was conducting the property search as ordered." The paper was a pawn shop receipt. It was found tucked deep into the lining of Clara's jacket, which hung in her private guest house closet. The receipt was dated 3 days prior, and the description on it chillingly matched a diamond bracelet. Clara felt the shock physically, a cold wave washing over her. "I've never been to that pawn shop," she stated firmly, keeping her voice even despite the crushing realization. "I didn't take anything. This is planted." Marcus, though sympathetic to her person, was helpless against the facts. The evidence was clear, concise, and damning. The dramatic accusation was delivered in Edgar's main office, with Saraphina and Victoria both present. Victoria was, of course, performing the perfect surprise, pressing her manicured hand to her chest. "Oh, Edgar, how truly awful! To think we trusted her with Saraphina! I warned you, brother. I warned you about the type of influence she carried." Edgar was a study of profound internal conflict. The evidence, the receipt, the security gap, all pointing one way, battling against his own instinct and the undeniable sight of his daughter's genuine distress. It was well after midnight when Edgar, Saraphina, and Clara returned to the Kingsley estate. The house was deceptively quiet, save for the presence of Victoria, who was still downstairs, playing the role of the distraught, concerned sister to the handful of late-night staff. When Victoria turned and saw them, 3 of them, enter the foyer together, Edgar resolute, Saraphina strong, and Clara back by their side, a flicker of pure, devastating panic crossed her face. She recovered instantly, forcing a bright, manufactured smile. "Oh, thank God! Saraphina, you had us so worried, darling. Where have you been, and what is she doing here?" she demanded, pointing at Clara. "We need to talk, Victoria. My study, now." Victoria, confident in her frame-up and her ability to control Edgar, followed, her mask of confusion firmly in place. Inside the study, Edgar had already initiated a video call with his personal lawyer and had summoned Marcus, the head of security. The silence was heavy, broken only by the lawyer's distant, digitized voice asking for clarification. "What is this about, Edgar?" Victoria insisted, trying one last time to seize control of the room. "Is this about that ridiculous girl stealing Elise's bracelet? I told you she was trouble." Edgar didn't look at her. He simply minimized the lawyer's screen and played the first video file from Saraphina's tablet onto the massive smart screen dominating the study wall. Victoria's confident facade began its rapid, catastrophic unraveling. The first video, showing her expertly disabling the security system, caused her face to drain of color. She tried to interrupt. "That can't be. It's manipulated footage, Edgar. Saraphina is deeply troubled, you know that." The second video played, showing Victoria in the study, punching the combination into the safe and removing the diamond bracelet. "Edgar, you can't possibly believe this computer trickery. Your daughter has always been prone to fabrication." The third video, the receipt planting, ended the charade. Victoria's composure shattered, her eyes darting between the screen, Edgar's cold rage, and Saraphina's steady gaze. The full truth and confession. Edgar played the final video, the conversation with her lawyer. Victoria's voice, clear and damning, filled the study. "The girl is my leverage. Keep her unstable, and Edgar looks incompetent. I'll get conservatorship, control the estate, and finally dismantle the perfect life they built." The conversation confirmed years of calculated manipulation, including deliberate admissions of increasing Saraphina's trauma.
Cornered, Victoria's polite veneer dissolved into pure, years-long resentment. She lashed out, confirming every suspicion. "You took everything. Father left the company to you. The house, the mummy. Elise was supposed to make you—"
"Vulnerable, but she made you stronger. I hated what she represented. Your perfect life while I got nothing." As Edgar absorbed the horror, the knowledge that his sister had harbored such destructive hatred for his beloved late wife, Saraphina stepped forward. She was trembling slightly, but her voice was steady and powerful. "You told me I killed my mother," she stated, looking Victoria directly in the eye. "You looked at a grieving 13-year-old who loved her mother, and you gave her a reason to hate herself." Her voice was clean, free of the years of poison. "You wanted me broken so you could control everything, but you taught me something instead." Victoria, still panting with rage, hissed, "What?" "That I'm stronger than you ever imagined," Saraphina concluded, a triumphant sorrow in her tone. "Because I survived you." Resolution and foundation. The lawyer, still on the video call, confirmed the evidence was admissible, indicating grounds for both criminal charges and a massive civil suit. Edgar's decision was instant and cold. "This is not a criminal matter. This is a family expulsion." Victoria's assets were immediately frozen, lawyers were instructed to draft a permanent separation, and she was escorted from the property that night by Marcus. Her final, desperate, venomous words, "This won't hold! I'll fight this!" were met by Edgar's quiet reply, "You already lost. You just don't know it yet." In the immediate aftermath, Saraphina finally collapsed into her father's arms, both of them crying, washing away 2 years of fear, guilt, and emotional separation. Clara quietly began to gather her few belongings, ready to give them the privacy they desperately needed. "Stay," Edgar stopped her, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, you're family now. You are the only person who saw the truth." The weeks that followed were defined by quiet, steady healing. Clara was formally reinstated, her name cleared, and her role solidified as a true partner in Saraphina's recovery. Saraphina entered real therapy, finally addressing the damage inflicted by Victoria's manipulation. The sealed West Wing was formally reopened. The music room now served as a place of memory, not grief, and Saraphina played Chopin for her father regularly. Months passed. Inspired by Clara's approach, Saraphina proposed the creation of the Elise Kingsley Foundation, dedicated to helping children whose pain manifests as anger and destructive behavior. Clara, finally utilizing her earned psychology degree, was made the director. The first program focused on training caregivers to look beneath the behavior and find the underlying trauma. One afternoon, seated at the same table at the Magnolia Cafe where the story began, Edgar told a colleague the story. "That waitress saved my daughter's life." Clara corrected him gently, watching Saraphina politely thank the server for her drink. "Your daughter saved herself, Edgar. I just gave her permission to try." That evening at the estate, music drifted from the piano room. Saraphina was playing the Chopin Nocturne, but it was different now. The melancholy was replaced by a joyful, resonant strength. Edgar listened from the doorway, no longer afraid to enter the sacred space. Clara was nearby, reading, a permanent part of the family rhythm. Clara closed her well-worn notebook from the cafe, the final entry summarizing the whole impossible journey. Money couldn't fix Saraphina. Power couldn't heal her. but someone seeing her, really seeing her, made all the difference.
Saraphina, hysterical and desperate, screamed her defense. She wouldn't! Dan, you know she wouldn't! She's the only one who didn't run! Victoria moved in with her gentle poison. Darling, I know you care for Clara, but facts are facts. This is exactly why professionals are needed, not desperate amateurs. Edgar looked from the concrete evidence to his daughter's pleading face and back again. The liability, the legal ramifications Victoria had threatened, weighed too heavily on him. His own fear and broken judgment won. His decision was terrible and final. "Clara," he said, the word barely a whisper, "I have to let you go. I'm sorry. This can't be explained." Clara was given 1 hour to pack her sparse belongings. Saraphina was weeping, clinging to her father and then to Clara, trying physically to prevent the dismissal. "You're making a mistake! It's a trick!" Clara, stripped of her professional salary and her nascent alliance, maintained her composure with a strength that astonished everyone. She held Saraphina's gaze. "Sometimes the truth takes time, Saraphina. Don't let this stop you. Trust yourself. Trust what you know is real." Victoria personally supervised the termination, ensuring Clara was immediately escorted off the property. The final humiliation was reserved for Marcus, the head of security, who was forced to walk Clara out like a common criminal, his expression a mixture of duty and regret. Hours later, Clara was back in her old studio apartment, the space feeling smaller, darker, and colder than she remembered. The evidence against her, the timely security footage corruption, the perfectly placed receipt, felt too professional, too planned. Realization dawned like a physical blow. Victoria knew exactly where Clara kept her things, knew exactly how to disable the camera system with an insider's knowledge, and had executed the frame-up flawlessly. But why? What did Victoria gain from destroying Clara? Then the understanding hit. It wasn't about the bracelet. It was about the music room. Clara had been getting too close to the truth about Elisa's death and Victoria's manipulation of Saraphina. Saraphina was healing, and that healing was the biggest threat to Victoria's agenda.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.